Hey there, welcome back to the vlog. So I want to talk about something today which goes against the grain of conventional YouTube technology wisdom. Personally, I've been a user of the iPad since the very first version. I don't happen to have one here in front of me, but I do have a Generation 3 on this side, and I have a 2016 Generation 8 on this side. What I'm filming on right now is the new M1 iPad Pro. And the only reason I'm using this is just to see literally how it comes out when I use it. So looking at all of the YouTube videos that are coming out from the major tech reviewers, you would be forgiven for thinking that the latest M1 iPad Pro is something of a dud. And I basically don't agree with that. And so I'm going to lay out my argument as to what has happened and why everybody has misunderstood the device. Most technology YouTubers, they have each device as it comes out. So they're not really doing major upgrades. They're just doing incremental annual upgrades, and they review it and they say, right, okay, it's either better than last year's or worse than last year's. And with the iPad Pro, the cadence is a little bit off because it's not every year that a new iPad Pro comes out. Sometimes it can skip a year. And it's by basically missing what Apple did that has led to some confusion, which then has led to a backlash against the M1 iPad Pro. And I don't think that that backlash is warranted. And I'm going to explain why. So I use a MacBook Pro. I use it for coding, for video editing. I use it for administration tasks of cloud systems, and I do other stuff on it as well. I use Xcode, Visual Studio Code. I write scripts on it and stuff. But I still spend about 50% of my time on an iPad. And the reasons behind that is I can focus a lot better on an iPad without all of the multitasking and the interruptions that macOS would give me. So if I want to do email, I can just open up email, deal with that in one go, and then I can move on to the next task. Whereas when I'm on the Mac, it's like, a notification comes in and all of a sudden I just cannot let it go. I have to stop coding, go check to see what it is. And part of that is my own brain working against me, but at the same time, I just find I'm way more productive on an iPad. I literally spend most of my time making notes on iPad. I have Bluetooth keyboard for this one, so I type emails on the iPad. Anything that I'm looking up or doing reference work is done on the iPad, so I've got my code window open on my MacBook. But then I've got the iPad with whatever the web pages that I'm referencing and stuff like that. So for me, the iPad is more than just something that I take notes on using the Apple Pencil. I do also do illustrations on it and other artwork and stuff like that. So the iPad to me is a very important device, but it doesn't do everything, and I've never wanted it to do everything, but it does fill a specific niche. Now, as I just mentioned, the 2016 iPad, which is the 6th generation, if I remember rightly, I've been on that for a couple of years, and it has done me very, very well. However, my eyesight is aging. I need bigger text sometimes when I'm doing certain tasks. I also find that I spend a lot more time zooming in all the time just to, or even zooming out sometimes to fit everything on the screen. The idea of having a larger screen was a driving factor in me deciding a while ago that I was going to move up to the iPad Pro. Now, obviously, the year that I happened to do it was also the year that Apple is moving everything over to the M1 chip, and as a result of that, it was a bit of a watershed moment when I did this technology upgrade. So here's where we get to what happened with the iPad Pro. All of these iPads, they work on an ARM chip, the same as what is in your mobile phone. It's an ARM processor designed by Apple. And in the case of the iPad Pro, the previous version of the iPad Pro had the A12Z Bionic, if I remember rightly. And then, of course, the new one is the M1. But the M1 was actually based on the A14X. So what's happened is you've gone from whatever the other older Apple silicon chips were. So each year that a new iPad Pro comes out, they put a new ARM processor in it, which is normally faster. It's got more GPU power. It's more processor efficient. It has, it's just basically a spec update. However, the one thing that's always been very obvious with the iPad Pros is that they have a lot of headroom that is unused on them. And in the case of the M1, it's really obvious that the iPad itself has so much runway that it could be using, but as a lot of people have pointed out, iPad OS just doesn't use that. Now, this headroom that is in the iPad Pro CPUs is rather interesting, because when you look at what was going on the Intel side of things with the actual desktops and laptops, there was a lack of headroom, and so people were looking for faster processors, whereas on the iPads, we're not necessarily looking for faster processors, we just happen to have them. So what Apple did was improve the iPad, just as they've always done with its roadmap unchanged, but then the processor that's in that, they move over to the desktop. So now you've gone from Intel to ARM on the desktop. And then we have this weird stunt where Tim Cook is pretending that he's taking a desktop processor out of a Mac and putting it into an iPad Pro. Well, that's simply reframing the narrative to something that's not actually correct, because the iPad already had an ARM processor in it. It was the M1, whatever the M1 designation was before it became an M1. So the iPad gets updated. They move everybody on the desktops over to ARM. And then you end up with this weird situation where all of these tech reviewers have totally misunderstood that the iPad Pro is still a spec bump, the same as it has been. It's still on the same roadmap. It hasn't been ruined. It's still an iPad. It just so happens that now the desktops are running on the same processor that was in the iPad. So Apple has said that they would never make iPad OS like Mac OS. They never said that iPads were going to run Mac OS. An iPad is still an iPad. It always has been, and it probably always will be to some extent. However, the desktops now, they're creating this confusion, and Apple wasn't helping when they came up with that silly stunt to show Tim Cook, pretending that like he's some spy nicking the processor and shoving it into an iPad. It was there all along. Like the narrative has been flipped for marketing purposes. And of course, everybody's all of a sudden going, well, why is the iPad unable to run Final Cut Pro? So it seems that a lot of the YouTube tech community has totally missed this very, very obvious point. And when you look at it, I can't help going like, well, how did they miss this? Because it's really obvious what's happened. The iPad never changed, the desktops changed. And so just because the desktops changed doesn't mean that you can suddenly run Final Cut Pro on an iPad. Like, it's just, there's something fundamentally busted in their understanding of what happened here. So for me, the upgrade from a 2018 6th generation iPad to an M1 iPad Pro, I'm not doing that little tiny incremental 1 year upgrade that everybody is suddenly saying has ruined the iPad. Instead, I've basically come up a 3-year upgrade path and jumped across models to a higher up model. So, for me, the upgrade has been phenomenal. It's the greatest iPad I've ever owned, and I will be using this now for several years going forward until such time as I decide that I need to upgrade again. But it's not going to be next year, and it's probably not going to be the year after that. So there you have it. Whilst everybody is basically bemoaning the M1 iPad, I actually think that nearly everybody that claims that Apple has ruined the iPad actually doesn't understand happened with the iPad and with the M1 chips, with the desktops and the laptops. So that's my unpopular opinion. If you like these videos, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more, please hit subscribe, and speak to you soon.